If you've requested access to this, I assume that you struggle with emotional eating, either currently or you have in the past. And so have I. I've had eating disorders, body dysmorphia, anxiety, and depression my whole life. So I truly understand how it feels and how distressing it can be when we feel out of control around food. I really used to believe that there was no escaping the vicious binge restrict cycle. I had completely given up hope of ever having a healthier relationship towards my body and towards food. But I'm here to tell you that there is hope. And I really hope that this tool can give you some strategies which I have learned and applied to my own life, which have really helped me make legways with overcoming my negative relationship with food and reducing the episodes of emotional eating in my life. I really want to stress that progression is slow. Sometimes you might feel like you're dealing with your emotional eating better than others, and sometimes you might feel like you're having a bit of a relapse. Anytime you feel like you're relapsing, simply just return to this resource, and it should really help you to start to put some strategies in place to move forward again. So, let me know if this sounds familiar to you. You get stressed out and you reach for a packet of chips, and then you just end up feeling more stressed and guilty later on, or you're feeling lonely and you reach out to a packet of Tim Tams and you just find yourself going back for more and more and more later on. And you end up saying to yourself, I can't have any of them. I lose all control. If I have one, I will eat the entire box. You just feel so much shame and guilt about food. And you tell yourself over and over again, I'm going to start again Monday. I'm going to stop eating these foods. But you just find that the same patterns are repeating over and over again. It's like a groundhog day. Eventually, after enough episodes of this, you just start to tell yourself the story that there's just no breaking this cycle of emotional eating for you. The guilt, the shame, it really becomes consuming. A lot of people believe that emotional eating or this binge eating is actually the problem, and the solution is to remove the foods that we enjoy. And this is like the only way that we will ever be happy, that we'll ever have the bodies of our dreams. However, I just want you to stop and consider for a second that maybe what you really need to do is end restrictive diets, to learn that you can have all things in moderation, to learn that food isn't going to be scarce or removed tomorrow, to learn that food is always there and available anytime you desire it. We can't spend our whole life in a diet. And I think as women, a lot of us do try to live in a deficit. And I'm just here to encourage you to break free from that diet culture. I'm here to encourage you to learn to listen to your body, to listen to our emotions, and to start to give our bodies what we truly need to feel happy. So, what is the diet cycle? You feel out of control because you've eaten something, and to gain control, you tell yourself you're going to go on a diet. Your dieting behavior is that you start to restrict the foods that you binge on. You tell yourself you'll never be able to have this food again. And that actually makes you crave the food even more and it increases your feelings of hunger. You start obsessing about the foods that you're not allowed to eat. You start fearing them and avoiding social situations. And this actually leads to the binging behavior. You eat so much of the food because you're telling yourself that tomorrow you won't have it again. You feel like you failed. You feel like you're not good enough. And then you feel like you need to go back on a diet. This cycle is going to continue, and the only way to break it is to stop restricting food, to change our mindset towards food, and to stop feeling shame and guilt when we do eat certain food items that we enjoy. So tell me, does this diet mindset sound familiar to you? I can't eat at this event, or I can't eat when I'm around people. I feel judged. How many calories do I have left? Oh, I can't eat that. It's too many calories. Oh no, I can't eat that. Once I start, I can't stop. I have no control around food. This is a diet mindset. And the only way to break our comfort eating, our emotional eating, is really to move away from this diet mindset and towards intuitive eating mindset. So, when we're intuitively eating, we're pretty much just learning to listen to our body and our emotions. It's switching our internal dialogue, trying to reinforce some new ideas such as I can have fun socializing and I can make healthy choices at the same time. Or I can eat food which is tasty. I can savor the experience without feeling like I have no control over it. It's learning to listen to your body. Am I actually feeling hungry? What do I actually feel like eating? And this resource is really going to help you to move away from the diet mindset and towards intuitive eating. The first step is to remove guilt associated with food and emotional eating by realizing that emotional eating and food, neither of these are actually bad. They're just coping mechanisms, and they've actually served us really well to this point in time to deal with any of the negative emotions that have come up in our life. So, I want you to take a moment to reflect and write down your answers to some of these questions. For starters, reflect on your early life experiences. Do you remember when you first started to use food as a coping mechanism? Describe the situation, your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. Go into as much detail as you can here and really relive it. Have a think about how you used to cope before you started using food. Can you remember a time where you used to have this emotion without eating? The next question is: has your emotional eating gotten worse over time? If so, elaborate on that. What have you noticed? How has emotional eating caused you to self sabotage? Do you find yourself getting stuck in that diet cycle? Do you find yourself avoiding certain social situations? Do you find your negative self talk really increases after emotional eating? Have a think about what components of emotional eating are actually not serving you, and what impact do they have on you? The next thing I want you to really reflect about is your relationship with food. At the moment, how do you actually feel towards food? Describe any thoughts and emotions that arise. This might be feelings about fear, guilt, or maybe you feel okay around the majority of food, but there's certain food items that you have more negative feelings towards. I then want you to think about how has food actually enhanced your quality of life? It obviously gives our bodies energy that it needs to function. Food is not inherently bad, yet we tend to really focus on the negative aspects and fear the calories that are actually essential for our survival. So I really want you to take a moment to think about how does food benefit us? And finally, I want you to think about how your emotional eating has actually been of service to you over time. It's actually helped you to deal with a lot of really difficult situations. So while we might view emotional eating as bad, try to take a moment to actually be grateful for all that food has done to be a crutch for you in some really difficult times in your life. It doesn't mean that we necessarily want to keep relying on food to be our support system. We definitely want to work on developing some new tools. However, it really has served you to this point in life. So take a moment to actually be grateful for food and the comfort that it has provided you. The second tool I have for you to learn to overcome your emotional eating is to start to tune into your hunger cues and to start to recognize the differences between physical hunger and emotional hunger. So, there are a lot of different reasons we eat. Physical hunger is actually just one of them. Some of the reasons we eat are things like pleasure. Food does bring us pleasure. It is delicious to eat food. We eat socially because we're going out with our friends to fit in. We eat culturally, for example, holiday seasons. And we eat emotionally due to boredom. That's only a few. You can probably think of a handful more reasons why sometimes you eat. So let's start by actually recognizing the difference between our physical hunger and our emotional hunger. And this will help you to slowly, over time, reduce the episodes of your emotional eating. So, when we are physically hungry, you notice that there is a gradual onset. It doesn't just come out of nowhere. Whereas when we are emotionally eating, there tends to be a trigger, and just out of the blue, we feel this sudden onset desire to eat. And the desire is urgent when it is emotionally driven. Whereas when it's physical hunger, usually it's non urgent. We definitely need to eat. And depending on how long we have felt physically hungry for, we might start to feel increased urgency for food. However, generally speaking, is that slow, gradual onset, and we are able to put up with being hungry for a period of time. Whereas when it's emotional distress, it's definitely very sudden and urgency. We cannot put off eating. We have to go grab something straight away. When we're emotional at eating, we tend to crave specific foods as well. And a lot of the time, these are high sugary foods, fatty foods, which give us a dopamine hit. Whereas with physical hunger, we tend to more desire whole foods, a more satiating meal. We don't have a specific craving for anything in particular, but we just need food because we are hungry. We have some physical cues when we're physically hungry as well. Like we might feel dizzy, we might start to have our stomach rumbling, we might start to have low energy. Whereas when we're emotionally eating, there tends to be no physical cues. Like I said, it just comes out of nowhere. The other big difference between emotional and physical eating is that when we're physically eating, we do, once we have a meal, we actually feel satisfied and we stop eating. However, when we're emotionally eating, we tend to never be satisfied and we go back for more and more and more and more. And that is when the guilt really accumulates for us. So, these are just some of the signs of physical versus emotional. eating, I really want you to take a time to reflect on these and then to tune in with your body next time you feel like emotional eating. What do you actually notice before an emotional eating episode? If there's any other signs that I haven't noticed, just jot them down. Become more in tune with your body so you can start to recognize and ask yourself the question when you feel like eating: am I actually hungry right now? Why am I hungry? Is food the answer to this? The next thing you should do to overcome emotional eating is actually give yourself permission to eat the foods that you keep on restricting, but eat them mindfully. You may notice that the forbidden foods are actually the foods that you're most likely to emotionally eat. So instead of depriving yourself, just give yourself unconditional permission to sit and eat the foods you enjoy. That might mean sitting down and eating a whole packet of Tim Tams initially, but you'll find over time you start to have more control around a packet of Tim Tams and you'll no longer crave the entire box. When the food is not restricted in our life, you'll start to recognize that you can eat them in moderation. You can have one or two Tim Tams without eating the entire packet because you know that the rest of the packet will still be there tomorrow. I do recommend that you don't just remove all of the food rules that you have at once, however, because you might feel really overwhelmed. So instead, just gradually remove one rule at a time. For example, it might be that you restrict chocolate day to day, and maybe chocolate is one of the main things that you binge eat on. So try to work on adding in one piece of chocolate at night. Maybe it's that you're going to allow yourself to go out for a meal once per week if you're someone who finds that you can't go out and enjoy food with loved ones. And once you become comfortable with this new habit, you can work on introducing a new habit to move towards that intuitive eating mindset. One thing I really recommend is to try introducing one food item that you feel out of control with and to practice mindful eating. For starters, you're going to work on portioning your food and having a correct portion size. Anytime you're eating a meal, and particularly the food items that you binge on, really try to make sure that you're sitting down in a peaceful environment without distractions. So turn off the TV. You're more likely to mindlessly eat a whole packet of chips or Tim Tams if you are watching TV at the same time. Avoid distraction, avoid conversation. Just be present with the food and consider your food choices. Ask yourself, do you really want to eat this food item right now? If it's something like a piece of chocolate, ask yourself, do I really want this? Sometimes that question alone might make you to stop and realize that you don't actually even want to eat the biscuit. It's just the fact that you think you can't, which is making you want it. And you might choose to actually leave it at that point and go towards something more whole food or more satiating, which is going to make you feel a bit better. Or maybe you decide that you do actually want to eat that food item, and in which case you're going to really spend your time to appreciate the food. Be thankful that you can eat this food, that you are financially able to access this food, that food is abundant in your life when it is not for many other people. Use your senses, really smell the food. How does it feel in your hands? And then just take a very small bite. Really savor the taste. What is the texture? What flavors do you notice? Put your fork down in between bites and really take your time to be present with that little mouthful. Take your time and enjoy the whole meal. This eating strategy can be applied to any of your meals. I actually use this strategy anytime I eat a meal now, but particularly when you're trying to reintroduce an item of food that you typically binge on, learning to sit down and eat this mindfully, if you need, with the support of a loved one, can be a really great strategy to help you to learn to stop fearing the food and to start learning to be controlled in your consumption of the food. I have included a link if you click here to a really fantastic mindful eating meditation. You could try popping that on and having a listen to that as you're trying to eat a food item which you normally binge on. The next thing with managing emotional eating is to actually start to identify your emotions. So, next time you feel the urge to emotionally eat, pause and take a moment to recognize what you're feeling and what emotions are present. I've included an emotion wheel, which can really help you to identify your emotions if you're not really sure what's coming up. Once you identify the emotions, name them out loud, or better yet, write them down. Writing them down helps us to detach from the emotion. When we have strong emotions, usually it's because there is a need that is not actually being met. And what we do is we try to use food to meet that need. So instead, once you identify your emotion and write it down, ask yourself, what is it that I truly need in this moment? And is food actually the answer? Is food going to fill that need? Usually you'll find the answer is no, unless it's physical hunger. So try journaling before before you eat. Give yourself a pause so you start to be less impulsive with your eating. And if you still want to eat after you journal, that's okay. Give yourself permission and remember, eat it mindfully without guilt. It's also just worth to remember that it's okay to have difficult emotions from time to time, and we don't need to run from these. We don't need to eat to disguise them. Sometimes we just simply need to be with our difficult emotions. So here's how the wheel works. You're going to start in the center and you're going to identify, for example, you might be feeling sad. You might then identify that the reason you're feeling sad is because you're feeling lonely, and you might be feeling lonely because you're being physically isolated, for example. Really getting to the bottom of what you're feeling and why you're feeling sad, why you're feeling lonely and isolated, can put you in a better space to have a think what you might be able to do, which is more productive other than returning to food. Ask yourself the question, will eating food help me to feel less isolated right now? Will it help me to feel less lonely? And you'll probably realize the answer to that is no. The final thing I would like you to do is work on developing a coping mechanism toolbox. So at times we find ourselves turning to food to manage our emotions just simply because we haven't learned any other coping mechanisms. Food actually gives us a really quick dopamine boost, and that numbs our negative feelings. However, just like a drug, it's actually really fleeting. Dopamine is short lived, and it leads to a cycle of that when our moods drop again, we crave more dopamine, and we keep reaching out to those calorific foods for our next dopamine hit. So instead, let's take some time to explore some other coping mechanisms, and these just may not have been taught to you earlier in life. So, some suggestions are things like taking a walk in nature, practicing meditation or journaling, which is one of my favorite, deep breathing exercises, engaging in mindful painting or coloring. This is one personally which I never would have thought appealed to me until I tried it, and I became obsessed with water painting for mindfulness. Reaching out to a friend, spending time with a pet, like cuddling a pet, particularly like, for example, if you're feeling lonely, enjoying a relaxing evening at home if what you're actually feeling, for example, is really stressed. Maybe it's something like treating yourself to a massage, or maybe you need to get out and do some exercise because exercise releases endorphins, which makes us feel happier. Whatever works for you might not work for someone else. So it is really important that you take some time to discover which of these resonate with you. Like I said, these are some of the strategies which I personally have found really helpful, but definitely take some time to explore these and even explore other strategies. What you might notice is that depending on what you're actually feeling, the coping mechanism that's going to help you might change. So, for example, if you're lonely, you might find that reaching out to a friend is going to be a really helpful strategy rather than eating. If you're tired, you might notice that a helpful strategy would be recognizing, I'm actually feeling tired right now. Food's not going to help that. I need to have a nap. Gradually, what you're going to do is you'll assemble your own coping mechanism toolbox. I want you to identify the feeling that you're experiencing, the emotion, and several strategies that might help. Usually, I find that the reason that we're going to be emotionally eating is because we're feeling disgusted or sad, for example. So, if you're feeling sad, if you're feeling depressed, if you're feeling sad because you're feeling guilty, if you're feeling sad because you're feeling lonely or vulnerable or hurt, if you're feeling disgusted because you're feeling really bad about your body, what are some things that are going to help other than turning to food? You're going to write down your emotions and several different coping strategies here, and this is going to become your emotional eating toolbox. And over time, what you'll find is that your episodes of emotional eating will reduce, and going to the alternative coping mechanisms will become your default over time. I just want you to reflect on this. My closing message for you is that turning to foods is actually an avoidant tactic, and society often pressures us to constantly pursue happiness. It leaves no room for us just to embrace the lows in life. And lows in life do happen, they are inevitable, they are part of the human experience. It is so normal to have lows, it is normal to feel sad. Instead of running from it, try to embrace that. Instead of seeking that immediate gratification, instead of turning to food, just consider sitting with your discomfort. Sit with your emotions and try to really understand what's happening. How is it significant? What is it that you're trying to avoid? And how can you more purposefully move through this? Learn to embrace discomfort. This is why I mentioned that journaling is one of my absolute favorite strategies. And as is mindfulness practice, putting on a meditation and really just zenning out when I feel the desire to comfort eat. You can actually Google meditations for overcoming emotional eating, meditations for feeling calm. You can find so many free meditations on YouTube, which are fantastic things to put on and really pause and force your body into a state of relaxation when you feel like you need to emotionally eat. Over time, the more able you become to sit with your negative emotions, the less fearful you'll be. And you'll realize that it's okay to feel sad in a moment, and the feeling will actually pass over time, just like a wave. It might come crashing in, move away. Also, try to embrace the mantra it's okay not to feel happy all the time. Negative emotions are part of the natural human experience, and I don't need to mask them with food.